Have you ever woken up, checked your crypto wallet, and found $83,000 just sitting there? Well, thanks to Hyperliquid's airdrop, that was the reality for many people out there. And in December, HYPE was arguably the hottest coin in the entire crypto world, running from around $4 to $34 with barely any pullbacks. But now that it has cooled down a bit, I think it's the perfect time to ask the following question. Is it time to buy HYPE? Well, to answer this, let's take a look at both sides of the picture, the pros and the cons, before coming up with our final verdict. Starting with the pros, or the reasons to buy HYPE. And the first one has got to be the potential for future airdrops. You see, Hyperliquid has set aside a whopping 38.88% of its total supply for future emissions. That's over a third of all tokens that could potentially be airdropped in the future. So that's obviously going to entice people to buy and hold HYPE. After all, their first airdrop created so many millionaires and was arguably the most successful airdrop in history. The average user who qualified got 2,881 HYPE, which is currently worth around $61,000, even after the recent correction. So it stands to reason that people will want to stick around for round 2. Also, there is a rumor that staking could be a key requirement for people to qualify for those future airdrops, which, if true, would be super bullish. Because now people will have to lock up their tokens, at least for a little bit, and that of course would reduce any potential selling pressure. But anyways, my next reason to potentially buy HYPE is that there's been some crazy demand for it, which comes from two sources in particular. First is their Hyperliquid Assistance Fund. That's basically a general purpose fund that supports their ecosystem. But what's interesting here is that it takes a portion of the trading fees and uses that to buy HYPE from the open market. For example, between December 17th to the 19th, the Assistance Fund bought over 150,000 HYPE tokens. And if we annualize that, we're looking at $686 million per year in buy pressure just from the Assistance Fund. So that's honestly insane. And it should be no surprise that the token has pumped so much, in large part due to this buying. But here's the thing. That's not the only thing driving up the price. You see, there's been a crap ton of TWAP orders that are constantly buying HYPE on the open market. If you don't know, TWAP stands for Time Weighted Average Price, and it's a type of order that breaks up a large buy into smaller chunks and spreads it out over a period of time. So the point here is that there's been some massive TWAP buys lately. We're talking about millions of dollars executed over a multi-day period, pretty much forcing the price of HYPE higher because there's not enough sell orders to offset those buys. But you may be wondering, who's behind those huge buys though? Well, my theory is that it's the market makers and exchanges loading up on HYPE so that they can list it themselves. That, or it's the VC funds looking to get some exposure to HYPE because Hyperliquid didn't do any private sales at all. So if the big players want in, they gotta buy it on the open market just like the rest of us. But anyhow, those sources of demand are quite impressive. But even if they dry up, my next reason to buy is much more long term, and it's the fact that their tokenomics are set up for success. First of all, their token distribution heavily favors the community, with 70% of the total supply allocated to the ecosystem and its users, which is cool, but it gets even better. You see, a portion of every trading fee on Hyperliquid is used to buy back and burn HYPE. That's right, every trade helps decrease the overall supply of HYPE. In the first month alone, over 0.01% of the total supply was burned. Now, that may not sound like a lot to you, but if you look at the total amount of burned HYPE tokens, it would rank as the 172nd largest holders with roughly 125,000 tokens burnt. But here's the thing. The deflationary pressure is only part of the story, because there's also potential for growing HYPE's utility through things like fee reductions, staking rewards, gas fees, and even vault access. Now, I don't want to bore you with all of the details here, but my point is, this increases the demand and buy pressure for HYPE from the people who want it for those specific purposes. And as we all know, the more legit sources of demand, the better for any token's price in the long haul. Okay, so far, you've gotten a glimpse of the sky-high potential of the HYPE token. But my next reason to potentially buy has to do with the Hyperliquid platform itself. You see, Hyperliquid has been absolutely killing it even before its earth-shattering airdrop. At some point, it was facilitating an insane $13 billion in trades every day. To put that in perspective, that's more than most tier 1 centralized exchanges. And all this trading activity translates into fees for the platform and by proxy, more liquidity and value accrual for HYPE holders. When you work out Hyperliquid's annualized revenue, they're making around $550 million. And just earlier this past December, Hyperliquid ranked number 4 among all blockchains in terms of fees generated, behind only Ethereum, Solana, and Tron. But that's not all, as Hyperliquid's TVL is currently around 2.3 billion, which makes it a top 20 DeFi protocol by TVL, already putting it in the same league as blue chip projects such as Curve, Compound, and Aave. But perhaps what's most impressive is that since the start of this year, Hyperliquid has onboarded nearly 27,000 new users. I mean, just look at this chart. As new users join and trade, they generate more fees, which in turn goes into buybacks, causing a positive flywheel for the HYPE token. Now, I know that some of y'all might be thinking, sure, these numbers look great right now, but what about the long haul? Like, is this growth sustainable? Well, I'm glad you asked, because my next potential reason to buy is all their upcoming catalysts. But before we get to those, I gotta tell you about IoTeX, a project that's pioneering the DePIN revolution and was the first to bring a DePIN device on chain. They recently launched their IoTeX 2.0 upgrade, which introduced a modular platform that can connect millions of real-world devices directly to the blockchain. Key to that are tools like IoID, which gives off-chain devices an on-chain identity for easy tracking and data transparency, and WebStream, a decentralized network that enables off-chain compute and verifiability. But IoTeX isn't just focused on the tech. No, they're building out an entire ecosystem. Like, their platform already supports over 50 DePIN projects and 200 plus total integrations, making it the 3rd largest DePIN ecosystem after Ethereum and Solana. For example, partnerships with projects like GeoNet are bringing 10,000 devices online for geomapping. And with their OKX wallet integration, 50 million users around the world can now trade IoTeX assets natively through their DEX, making it more accessible than ever before. With integrations into major networks like Solana and Polygon, IoTeX is also expanding its reach even further, powering the projects that connect the physical world to the blockchain. So my point here is, if you're into DePIN, then you definitely got to check out IoTeX, and you can just use my link below. All right, back to Hyperliquid and its upcoming catalysts. And boy, let me tell you, they got some really bullish ones in their pipeline. The most anticipated one, in my opinion, is the Hyper EVM launch, as this would lead to more liquidity flowing into Hyperliquid from other chains, and that would of course drive more deflationary token burns. But then there are the Dutch auctions for Hyperliquid's limited spot coin tickers. These auctions, which are conducted in HYPE by the way, introduce scarcity into their ecosystem. You see, on Hyperliquid, you can trade unique exchange-specific tokens called spot coins. But there's a catch. Only around 280 of these tickers can be purchased each year. So this scarcity, combined with the Dutch auction mechanism, could lead to significant demand and price appreciation for both the spot coins and HYPE itself. But anyways, besides Hyper EVM and the spot coins, we also got things like staking, listing on tier 1 exchanges, and a lot more coming soon, all of which are bullish for HYPE. Now, for my last potential reason to buy, I want to zoom out for a bit and imagine what could happen to Hyperliquid at the peak of this bull run. You see, in 2021, projects like Solana, Avalanche, and Polygon rocketed like crazy. We're talking 50x, 100x, and even 500x in some cases. I mean, BNB went from 5 billion to over 100 billion, 20xing its market cap in just a span of a few months. Now, I'm not saying that HYPE will follow the exact same trajectory, but what I am saying is that if Hyperliquid can establish itself as both the top DEX and L1 ecosystem, then HYPE could have the run of a lifetime. At current prices, HYPE's FDV is around 23 billion, which is a big number, but it's a far cry from the valuations that other major ecosystems reached during the peak of the last bull run. Like, don't forget that Filecoin reached an FDV of $373 billion at the peak of the last cycle. So if all those can go crazy, then why not Hype? But anyhow, by now I bet you're itching to ape into Hype. But before you do so, we gotta discuss some reasons not to buy in order to give you the full picture. After all, we're not just moon boys on this channel. But anyways, the first potential reason not to buy would have to be its concerning levels of centralization. I mean, yes, Hyperliquid is a decentralized exchange in the sense that it uses an on-chain order book and does not custody your funds. But it's run by just 16 validators, and that number used to be 4. Recently, they increased it to 16 after the community pressured them. So obviously that's better now, but the point is that it's still more like a centralized platform than a real full-fledged DEX. Now I get it, their UX is amazing and not having to deal with KYC is a nice perk. But realistically, Hyperliquid has 2 paths forward. Either they stayed centralized and risk being forced to implement KYC, or they fully decentralize. But in both cases, their buttery smooth UX, which is arguably the biggest advantage, degrades significantly. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens. Now, another major risk with Hyperliquid is the growing risk of hacks and exploits. You see, they have billions of dollars locked in their smart contracts, and their success has put a big target on their back. Now, this isn't just theoretical, by the way. We've already seen some suspicious activity popping up around their ecosystem. For example, there were reports about wallets associated with North Korean hacker groups like Lazarus snooping around the Hyperliquid DEX. And what's concerning is that Hyperliquid's code is completely closed source. Like, no one outside the core team can audit it for potential weaknesses. So we gotta simply trust that Hyperliquid has got its security locked down. Now, after all the Twitter drama regarding the North Korean hackers, the Hyperliquid team came out and said that they take security extremely seriously and are already following all the industry's best practices. They've even put out a proper bug bounty in place, which was a big point of contention for the broader community. So yeah, they're definitely aware of the concerns and seem to be taking steps to address them. But at the end of the day, it's not a question of if Hyperliquid will be targeted, but when. And whether the security measures will be enough to hold off a determined attacker, well, that remains to be seen. So for us investors, we just gotta decide for ourselves if we're comfortable with that and size our investments accordingly. Alright, now remember how I talked about the amazing buy-side pressure that the Assistance Fund is providing? Well, that's actually a double-edged sword. You see, the fund currently holds around 300 million worth of hype. But if the fund shifts to diversifying, profit-taking, or covering costs, it could amplify any existing sell pressure on the market. This would also deter other potential buyers, as the buyback aspect of this fund is a pretty big selling point for Hype. But next, there's also the issue of whales. You see, last month, Hype experienced a sharp 29% dip in just 2 days. One whale, who was the 17th biggest holder at the time, started to dump their bags, and that crashed the price as a result. But that's just one whale. And more recently, I saw another whale which had 1 million Hype selling almost 20k every day. So point is, these big players can make it go down as easily as they made it go up. And if we have too much supply controlled by whales, then that could greatly affect the price stability of the Hype token. Just imagine what happens if some of them start aggressively taking profits, and then other whales start panicking as well. Now that would be a crazy death spiral. Now, with all that being said, let's go back to our original question. Is it time to buy Hype? Well, there's no denying its potential. The tokenomics, growth metrics, and roadmap all point to a project with massive upside. However, I recently came across an open letter highlighting the challenges within Hyperliquid's ecosystem. And I gotta be honest, it's slightly concerning. Like, validators have voiced their concerns about the closed source code and the reliance on a centralized API. Also, their testnet exposed further flaws, with a black market for Hype tokens emerging out of the misaligned incentives. On the mainnet, the centralization is hampered by 81% of the staking power being concentrated in the foundation's nodes. But yeah, all of these should be concerning to us as potential investors. Nonetheless, I gotta say that the team seems to be listening and they are working to address these concerns. So I do have hope that they can get over these roadblocks. That's why for me personally, I will be holding on to most of my airdrop and have even bought back some that I sold earlier. But as to selling everything and going all in on hype, I'm not so sure that I personally do that. But anyhow, if you are into AI agents, which is one of the hottest sectors in all of crypto, then be sure to check out this video where I break down my most promising ones.